London at Home presents 10 London sports people you've probably never heard of. Number 10 is Edith Garrett. Edith Garrett and her husband had been taught jiu-jitsu by the first Japanese martial arts teacher in the UK, Sadakazu Uenishi, at his dojo in Golden Square, Soho. Uenishi was so impressed with the Garrards that he put them in charge of the dojo when he left London in 1908. Garrett taught the women and children's classes and fought in exhibition matches all across London. In 1910, Edith Garrett began the Suffragette Self-Defence Club to teach jiu-jitsu and other self-defence skills to women campaigning for votes for women to defend themselves against police brutality and violent hecklers. Her adapted form of jiu-jitsu was nicknamed suffragitsu by the press. Edith Garrett continued to teach and demonstrate martial arts until the 1920s. Number 9. Robert McKay. In 1820, Robert McKay became the first world champion of racquets, despite the fact that at the time he was a prisoner at the Fleet prison. It's usually said that racquets, a game similar to squash, was invented at the Fleet prison in the 18th century. The prison was mostly used as a debtor's prison, and the bored prisoners invented their own game against the wall of the prison's central courtyard. It's thought that Robert McKay declared himself world champion after defeating all challengers from several nations during an open game in 1820. Number 8. Monica Harwood. 18-year-old Monica Harwood learnt to ride a bicycle in July 1895. 5 months later, she entered the first international women's 6-day race at the Royal Aquarium near Parliament Square. The teenager was competing against the greatest cyclists of the day, Clara Grace of England and Lisette Martin of France. Monica Harwood won the first day of racing, and the world champions never did catch up on her. Harwood covered 371 miles in 21 laps and was declared the winner. Her prize was £40, which is equivalent to about £3,000 in modern-day money. In a post-race interview, Harwood said that she rode a man's bicycle and rode in knickerbockers rather than a skirt. Number 7. Eugene Sandow. Strong men and strong women were frequent sights in fairs and music halls across the UK, but it was Eugene Sandow who helped make bodybuilding into something more than a variety act. Prussian-born Sandow attended a strongman competition at the Royal Aquarium near Parliament Square in 1889. French strongman and reigning champion Charles Sampson invited anyone in the audience to challenge him. Sandow took up the challenge. The two men bent iron rods over the forearms, snapped chains with their chests, and lifted a 150-pound weight. When Sandow lifted the weight over his head, when Sampson could not, Sandow was declared the strongest man on earth. Sandow travelled the world. He even learned yoga in India and brought it back to Britain, demonstrating yoga as a form of exercise. In 1901, Sandow organised the world's first major bodybuilding competition at the Royal Albert Hall. He was one of the judges alongside sculptor Charles Lawes and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In 1902, Eugene Sandow was defeated in competition by circus performer Kate Brumbach. Sandow continued to travel the world teaching and demonstrating the merits of exercise. Sandow was fitness instructor both to soldiers during World War I and to King George V. Number 6. Chevalier Dion. Chevalier Dion was born Charles de Beaumont in Burgundy in 1728. From 1777, Charles began to live as a woman and changed her name to Chevalier Dion. She even managed to convince King Louis XVI that she was a woman and demanded to be recognised as such. She came to live in London in the 1780s, and when her French pension from her time as a spy was ended during the French Revolution, she began to take part in fencing tournaments and give fencing lessons and demonstrations. One of her matches was captured in a painting. On the 9th of April 1787, she was asked to fight an exhibition match against Chevalier de Saint-Georges, a champion fencer from Paris. The match took place at Carlton House, with George, Prince of Wales, in the audience. It's not clear who won, but in the painting, Dion is scoring a hit on Saint-Georges. Dion's fencing career was cut short by an injury in 1796. Number 5. Bill Richmond. Bill Richmond was a freed slave from New York who came to live in London in the 1790s. At the time, pugilism, or boxing as it's now known, was one of the most popular spectator sports in London. Richmond entered the London boxing scene after a fight with a champion in 1804, which he lost. But Richmond persevered. Of his 20 recorded fights, he only lost 2. He set up a training school in London's West End, and his students included Tom Molyneux, William Hazlitt, and Lord Byron. He also ran a pub called the Horse and Dolphin near Leicester Square, where anyone who made racist comments was politely but firmly thrown out. Richmond popularised boxing moves, including the bob and weave, and boxing on the retreat. In 1821, Bill Richmond and several other boxers, the sporting superstars of the day, were selected to be ushers at the coronation of King George IV. Richmond is often cited as the first black British sportsman. Number 4. John Mayall. In the 1860s, a version of a bicycle with pedals was invented in Paris and soon arrived in London. Photographer John Mayall was one of the first people to buy this new velocipede, or bone shaker as they were quickly nicknamed, and was keen to improve the new device's popularity. On the 17th of February 1869, Mayall and his 2 friends set off from Trafalgar Square, intending to cycle the roughly 60 miles to Brighton. Mayall's 2 friends gave up, but Mayall continued, followed in a carriage by an eager journalist. Mayall reached Brighton in 15 hours, a record-breaking time and distance, even if his records only stood for a month or 2 before being broken. The coverage of John Mayall's feat may well have contributed to the rise in popularity of the bicycle, and I'm sure Mayall would be pleased that 138 years after he started the bicycle journey from Trafalgar Square, the most famous cycling race in the world, the Tour de France, started in 2007 in the same place. Number 3. Agnes Beckwith. Agnes Beckwith was born in Lambeth in 1861, the daughter of a swimming teacher. By the time she was 5, she was taking part in swimming shows and competitions. When she was 14, she swam from London Bridge to Greenwich in 1 hour 7 minutes, the second longest swim in the Thames at the time, second only to Matthew Webb. 3 years later she swam 20 miles in the Thames, wearing a lovely straw hat and a suit more like a modern swimsuit and less like the long bloomers female swimmers usually wore at the time. In 1880 she appeared at the Royal Aquarium near Parliament Square, where she trod water in the whale tank for 30 hours, equalling the record of Matthew Webb. Webb responded by upping the record to 60 hours, which Beckwith smashed by treading water for 100 hours. In 1885, Agnes Beckwith was billed as the greatest lady swimmer in the world. Number 2, the Duke of Shoreditch. The Duke of Shoreditch was actually a title given to the best archer in London in the 16th and 17th centuries. Since medieval times, all Englishmen were required to own a longbow and practice with it. Other sports were even banned because they distracted men from their archery practice. On the outskirts of London were several archery fields. During a tournament, when the archers of the various fields in London competed against one another, the winner of the day was jocularly dubbed the Duke of Shoreditch by Henry VIII. The title was used in subsequent competitions, regardless of where the archer was from. On one occasion in 1583, 3,000 archers took part in a parade led by the current Duke of Shoreditch. There was a ceremonial shooting at the model of a giant, and then a competition in Hoxton in which the 3,000 archers fired at a butt 135 metres away, when the modern Olympic standard is only 70 metres. Number 1, King Henry VIII. Okay, you've probably heard of King Henry VIII, but perhaps mostly for his penchant for eating a lot and cutting his wives' heads off. But King Henry VIII was a keen sportsman and practised a variety of different sports. He had shooting butts installed at Hampton Court Palace so he could practice archery. One wall of Henry's real tennis courts survives on Downing Street, and part of the real tennis court at Hampton Court dates to Henry VIII's day. It is said the king was playing tennis while his second wife Anne Boleyn was executed. During the diplomatic event, the Field of Cloth of Gold in 1520, Henry VIII challenged King Francis I of France to a wrestling match. Both men were keen wrestlers, but the French king won on the day. Despite having the game banned so that the men of England could concentrate on their archery, King Henry VIII had the first recorded pair of football boots made in 1526. He was a keen jouster, and an accident in 1536 left him with permanent mobility problems, and perhaps even left him with brain damage.